Premier Ford, he had a glowing review of this meeting. Just have a listen to what Doug Ford of Ontario had to say.
This has been the best meeting we've had in 10 years. Simple. Best meeting I've had in 7 years. And there was no expectations that the Prime Minister was going to come out and say, you get that project, you get that project. It was a great discussion. Now, we were all talking. Now it's time to put it into action. All of us are responsible. But I thought it was an incredible meeting. Great communication, great collaboration, and we all walked out of that room united. I described him today as Santa Claus. He's coming, and his sled was full of all sorts of stuff. Now he's taking off back to the North Pole. He's going to sort it out, and then he's going to call us.
All right, Ontario Premier Doug Ford getting into the Christmas spirit early as it's June in Saskatoon. We've been hearing from the premiers. We're going to hear now from the federal government. Dominic LeBlanc is the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, intergovernmental affairs, and one Canadian economy.
It's quite the title, isn't it, David?
It keeps growing. They just keep adding these
just
duties
the
to you.
title keeps growing.
Well, let's start with, set aside today for a second. When you leave here, you're flying to Washington, D.C. You're going to meet with Howard Lutnick. You're facing steel and aluminum tariffs doubling 48 hours from now, potentially, based on what the president has said. What are you hoping to get done in the next 48 hours?
So I'm going to Washington right after your show tonight. I'm seeing Mr. Lutnick and Ambassador Greer, the trade representative, tomorrow. It's a continuation of a discussion we had 10 days ago in Washington. It's a conversation around a broader security and economic partnership. Obviously, the objective, and we've been clear, is to have these tariffs removed.
Sure.
The idea that the president would increase steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% would be extraordinarily negative for the American economy. We talked about that with the premiers today. There are American businesses that would simply not be able to afford basic elements in their manufacturing, whether it's Canadian steel, aluminum from Canada. So in the end, will they proceed with this increase? They've applied it around the world. It's not just targeted at Canada. We're obviously hopeful, David, that we'll be successful in having all of these tariffs lifted. So not
Are you making
25%
progress,
tariff. I'm sorry?
Are you making progress? You get the sense from the Americans you're moving closer to that day?
I'll believe it when we see it. I think the fact that I texted with Mr. Lutnick on Friday, had a quick chat on the phone on the weekend. He told me to come down at the beginning of the week. We were in Saskatoon today. The conversations are ongoing. Our ambassador is meeting with people in the U.S. Trade Representative's office. So those conversations are progressing. The president arrives for the G7 summit in Alberta in 2 weeks. We've been saying to them that we think it would be important to make significant progress before then, but we're not there yet.
Okay, because I asked the Prime Minister last week if he felt maybe by then, or Canada Day, because you're pinning a lot of things on Canada Day as the deadline. Is that the time frame we should be looking at, or is it longer than that? I know Mexico's talking about restarting the USMCA review maybe as early as September.
Yeah, so we don't want to wait for a review that under the agreement would be in 2026. If the Americans signal that they want to do it before next year, we would be ready. They haven't signaled that to us. I'm talking to my Mexican counterpart as well later this week. It's important to continue to strengthen our relationship with Mexico in these conversations. But David, these tariffs should never have been applied. They're causing significant damage to Canada's economy. They've understandably created a circumstance of economic uncertainty. They're also hurting American consumers and American businesses. So we've thought for a long time, ultimately what will make Mr. Trump change his mind is American economic reality. That's why Canada is one of the few countries that has hit back with strong retaliatory tariffs that remain in place. And Mr. Lutnick raises that with me a lot when I see him.
Okay, all right, so that's the Canada-U.S. Relations component of the job title. The intergovernmental affairs title and the one Canadian economy, that's what today is in many ways about. There's a lot of projects on the table, and as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the one Canadian economy component of your job is to sort of get alignment on a lot of those things, right? As we move into this, fast-tracked single review phase. Everyone's happy today because nobody got a no. How do you keep them happy once yeses and nos on specific projects and winners and losers start getting picked?
Well, nobody came here with the expectation. First of all, legislation will have to be introduced in Parliament. We hope that Parliament will pass that legislation quickly. That will allow the government to proceed, as the Prime Minister said in his leadership campaign, in the election campaign, with an expedited process for projects that the government determines are in the national interest. It'll be a 2-year approval period, not 5 years or more, maximum of 2 years.
Right.
Hopefully some
Could be
projects
faster.
will go faster. So we got 2 things today. We got from the premiers a lot of encouragement to continue to make progress on big, important projects for the economy of the country. We just talked about the threats the American tariffs pose. Mr. Carney has said over and over again that we can give ourselves more than they can ever take away economically in terms of this tariff fight. But it starts with building giant projects that make the Canadian economy more productive, more competitive, allow us to diversify our trading relationships. So we talked about the importance of doing that work together. We talked about the importance of recognizing provincial processes so we don't duplicate at the federal level, coming to agreements with the provinces. And then we got into the nitty-gritty of looking at the kind of projects that would be in the national interest. In your home province of Newfoundland and Labrador, you may have the Premier on shortly.
He's waiting right over there.
We talked about a transformative project between Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec to develop clean hydroelectricity at quantities that would
And this is the Gull Island project in Labrador.
But we talked about the Baie du Nord project that our government had approved some years ago. These are just examples. The Western and Northern premiers came with a really interesting idea of bringing trade corridors and energy corridors to Northern Canada. So everybody left with the sense that, first of all, we have to see if Parliament passes the law. And then we'll work with the provinces and private sector proponents, because these aren't governments that will be proposing the vast majority of these projects. There'll be private sector investors that see that certainty as an opportunity to invest their capital.
Right, so the clean and conventional energy in the 2 of the big projects for my home province of Newfoundland and Labrador fit those criteria.
Right.
When we heard Mark Carney today talk about a decarbonized barrel of oil going into a pipeline to get to new markets in Asia, it is kind of music to Danielle Smith's ears, but she's still kind of skeptical in terms of the viability of that happening, even with that rhetoric, because she still believes C-69 emissions, caps. These things get in the way of it. How encouraged should the Alberta oil patch be that there is a path for another pipeline? Because the last time someone talked about a pipeline like this, it was TMX, and you were buying it so you could build it. Right. You don't want to do that.
Before that was Energy East, of course.
Right, but are we looking at, as she wants, a pipeline to the northwest into British Columbia to get somewhere around Prince Rupert or Kitimat? Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, again, the premiers, and Premier Smith said that at a news conference an hour ago, and a private sector partner that decides to use this new process and the investment certainty it gives them to put forward a project that would go through the approval process. Premier Canoe, the NDP Premier of Manitoba, made a very, very constructive intervention when he said we should harness the ingenuity and the innovation of the private sector in looking at which routes would be best, what is the best business opportunity. So we now have a process where that kind of work can be done with an expectation that there will be a coherent, expedited approval process, recognizing our constitutional obligations around Indigenous consultation, not diminishing the importance of the environmental review, but giving people some certainty around timelines and working with provincial territorial governments and Indigenous people to do these processes in harmony, on an expedited basis, because the moment requires that kind of effort.
The promise in the election was to do things we couldn't imagine or that seemed possible and do it at a speed we've not seen in generations.
You've got all the lines from the election.
Yeah, well, we've heard them a few times.
Good.
So what is that speed we have not seen? I know, look, it's been a busy agenda since the April 28th election, no question about it. But this is criteria and concepts of projects. When does it move from promise to project, like where these are the ones that are going to go through this process?
So, good question. The Premier's asked that question. We obviously don't want to prejudge the parliamentary process. The legislation hasn't even been introduced.
But if all goes well in Parliament,
if all goes well in Parliament, we would hope that the first tranche of projects, and we talked about them with premiers today, some are more ready than others, might be in a position to receive the designation as being in the national interest and start this expedited process as early as the end of the summer or this fall.
Okay, so that quickly.
The first tranche, sure.
Yep.
Some are more ready than others, but now people will have a sense that there's a willingness from all the first ministers to do this work, and we hope it incentivizes other people and other proponents to come forward.
Okay. Dominic LeBlanc, I know you got to go because you got to vote, and then you got a plane to catch to get to Washington, D.C. So thanks for being here. It's Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, Canada-U.S. Relations, and One Canadian Economy Minister, Dominic LeBlanc.